Thank you very much, Kara. So I want to welcome everyone to the March 3rd meeting of MLAC. And I just wanted to start the meeting with an acknowledgement that the last meeting had some contentious parts to it. And I received a lot of feedback afterwards and during the meeting. And as a co-chair and not chairing that meeting, I really felt for Scott, because it was a lot to have to handle. And we are all volunteers here. And I know offline, we've talked a bit about what is appropriate behavior, what's appropriate conduct. And I know one of the lobbyists that works with us offered some of the code of conduct that lobbyists had. I didn't know that they had that, but they were very reasonable, very practical, suggestions. And so Scott and I talked about them, and at least one of them we agreed to. So I wanted to turn it over to Scott. It's something that I feel like we need to agree to what these are. And it's something we just started. And so I'll just turn it over to Scott to kind of talk about the thing that we think is really important to start with.
Yeah, so I think, in talking with Patrick, I know that we have kind of a far less formal approach to how MLAC is conducted that I think can be really conducive to some really good discussion. But I think a lot of times, that can devolve into something a little more antagonistic. So I think one of the things that we had talked about, especially after the MLAC 2.0 and having the co-chair and kind of direct the meeting and guide things a little more, is the idea that that comments and other things should really be addressed to the chair directly, and questions and all of that other stuff. It doesn't. I wouldn't. In talking with Patrick, I don't think we need to formalize it as much as is done in the legislature, but I think at least ensuring that comments are sort of directed at the chair will help sort of diffuse any sort of tension or other things and help depersonalize a lot of this as, we're dealing with these really difficult issues. So I think kind of pushing forward on that all the discussions sort of be directed through the chair and that the chair kind of be guiding a lot of that and calling on folks. So I think that that's something that we can both definitely agree on.
Okay. Does anyone in the caucuses take exception to that, or is it something agreeable to those that are here? I guess can't speak for those that aren't, but I know. And Jill, welcome. I know you had a few difficulties. I'm happy that you're here. I don't know if you heard that or had any comments. Tammy does. Thank you, Tammy. You're off mute, but I can't hear you.
There we go. Okay, no, I wasn't. I kept clicking and it wasn't working. I don't have a comment. I have a question. So Scott, when we address our questions to you and Patrick, are you saying like if somebody is presenting on a bill and explaining the bill, that we don't question that person, we direct our questions to you and then you ask the questions? I want to know.
So I think it's, again, we're not trying to formalize it as much as the legislature where you go in and you say, chair priest, vice chair this, committee member, all of that. But I think as much as possible directing it to the chair and kind of putting all of that, directing things to the chair so that we're not ever sort of directing it to specific stakeholders that we then develop this kind of antagonistic devolution of the discussion. Even a, chair priest, I had a question about how this works, and I don't know if there's a stakeholder that could kind of address that or something like that, sort of invites the discussion, but it also it enables the chair to be kind of in more control of the meeting as well, I think.
That makes sense. Very good. Thank you.
And I think it'll definitely be a work in progress as all of this always is.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you for that, and we'll continue to work on it and have something that's agreeable to all of us in the caucus. And then Scott recommended that we start each meeting with just sort of an affirmation of the purpose of why we're all here, and he drafted one. I thought it was really well written. I thought about wordsmithing it, but I'm going to read it just as it was. So I really appreciate the spirit of it, and I think it's a great statement to start each meeting, and I'll be the first to do so. I want to thank everyone for their time, effort, and participation in our work before us today. I want to recognize that it's very difficult and important work, and I appreciate and value the perspectives and professionalism that everyone brings today. Thank you. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our meeting. All right. We got a lot of different emails with different attachments and such. And so I tried as best I could to sort them all into my email, but I found that it is all, I hope, on the MLAC website. So I'm going to use the MLAC website in order to pull up the agenda and all the attachments. And hopefully those are all updated and that there isn't something that's after the fact. The first, oh wait, aren't I supposed to ask for, is there a quorum or something like that, Kara? Or you have to do a roll call. So I take it away, Administrator Filsinger. I don't know if that's not too formal.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can just call me Kara, it all works. So just in terms of attendance, we have Jill, Scott, and Margaret for labor, and Matt and Marcy are excused. And we have Tammy, Sarah, Lynn, and Patrick. And John, are you on? I'm not. He was on phone last time, so I'm not seeing him. So yes, you do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. All right, the first item on our agenda is to review and approve the minutes of the February 17th meeting. I did receive an email with edited minutes, with kind of heavily edited, but I think they were fairly represented from what I understood. And just this morning, Scott provided some, I don't know if everybody looked at those edits or that edit. It's just one edit, Scott. Did you want to call it out individually so that we could vote on it, or, okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss. I don't know that it got to everyone yet. So I think down towards the end, the only thing that I edited was the comment that I had made. I believe it was at 133:34 on the second to last page, third to last page. That I changed it to read, Scott Strickland noted that it seems, or that there seems to be a lot of frustration that the discussion today has been limited to a dispute over the scope of the issue without any acknowledgement of the issue itself. He stated that he has concerns about what he views as a potentially existential threat to the guiding concept of balance and fairness in workers' compensation, for which there is no data available due to the use of non-disclosure agreements. He echoed the request for civility and discourse about the problem. And that was, I'd listened to the recording again, and I think there were two things that I added. One was a clarification of what I understood the frustration in the meeting to be, and then a clarification on that I had some concern about the non-disclosure usage and other things. So just wanted to note that that was the only edit that I had made. So.
Right. Does anyone have a question of Scott or of any changes to the minutes as they were presented? Okay, well then I would look for a motion to approve them.
Mr. Chair, I'll move the minutes with Scott's addition.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second? Margaret raised her hand and seconds. Is there any further discussion on the minutes? Oh, Scott.
Humorously, Lynn, when are you releasing your form and style guide for minutes? I know you always have such extensive, comprehensive edits on there.
Patrick, if I may, I was an editor in my past life, so there we are.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, thanks. All right, so all those in favor of approving the minutes with the edit?
Aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Okay, hearing none, they are approved.
Patrick, I just want to note that John McKenzie has joined us as well. So
Yeah, I saw John. Welcome, John. It's nice to see you.
Hi, I'm on.
All right. There is not an agenda item for it, but approval of the agenda is usually on agendas that I see. And I did get one request at the last moment to change the order. So I just want to call that out. Visions of settlement agreements, it has been requested that be moved to be second to the last. Is that correct? Did I capture that correctly?
yes, Mr. Chair. Since it's just a status update, AFL wanted to do that one quick before moving on to the reporting of injuries bill. So it's just a swapping of
I
the
have no
order.
exception with it. Does anyone else? Okay. Since we don't normally approve agendas, I'll move on and then move into department updates. And the first one is Workers' Compensation Board case law updates, if any. And I don't know if there are any. Are there any, Kara?
I don't believe there are. We just have that as a standing agenda item. I see Robert is on. He can chime in if he has anything new.
Nothing specifically for the members at this time. Thank you. This is Robert Partington from the board.
Thank you, Robert. Also, for the next one, we have no rulemaking update other than what we had last time. We try not to rulemaking during session. So the next one is the annual report on the worker benefit fund programs. This is normally a report we do closer to January than March. We're a little behind schedule this year, but we're getting it done. So this is one of your required review areas under the statute under 656-790 sub 3. So this is one thing you're supposed to do is get a report on the programs funded by the Worker Benefit Fund. And we have Kelly Barushko, who's from our Information Research and Technology session. We emailed out her PowerPoint presentation and her longer report. Kelly's going to go through the slides just for the quick overview. And if you have any questions about the details in the report, she's ready to answer those too. So take it away, Kelly. And Brittany's going to run the slides for you, Kelly.
Fabulous. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Fabulous. Thank you. All right. Thank you, co-chairs and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kelly Barushko. I'm the senior economist at the Department of Consumer and Business Services. And like Karen mentioned, I'll be providing you with a status update for the Worker Benefit Fund today. I'll start with an overview of the fund and then provide a little bit more detail on the individual programs that feed into it. And you can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this graph shows the ending fund balance for the Worker Benefit Fund as of September 30th, 2022. The vertical line that you see there indicates our most recent actual data, and then everything to the right of that line is our forecast. So as of September, the balance was $145.7 million, which is just over 22 months worth of WBF expenditures. And that is in compliance with the requirement set by House Bill 2788 of the 2019 session to maintain at least 12 months of expenditures in the fund. For our forecast, we use a few different economic indicators along with historical trends to help us calculate the expected fund balance. For revenues, our main metric is Oregon employment along with the WBF assessment rate. Employment has returned to pre-COVID levels, and the Office of Economic Analysis is projecting about 1% growth in employment each year through fiscal year 2027. Coupled with the WBF assessment rate of 2.2 cents per hour, we expect slow revenue growth through the forecast period. And then moving on to our expenditures, the main factors in projecting expenditures are Oregon wages and then accepted disabling claims, as well as DCBS administrative costs. Due to higher wages and accepted disabling claims in the last few years and admin costs expected to increase about 3% per year, we're expecting an increase in WBF expenditures. And then because expenditures are expected to outpace revenues, we are expecting the WBF fund balance to slowly decline, but still stay above that 12 months worth of expenditures through the end of fiscal year 2027. All right, next slide, please. This chart here shows the WBF assessment rate since the fund's creation in 1996. As mentioned in the previous slide, the current rate is 2.2 cents per hour, and this is split between the employer and the employee. This rate is determined by the DCBS director annually in a manner that minimizes changes in the rate while also maintaining that required 12 months worth of expenditures in the fund. All right, next slide, please. All right, here we show a breakdown of the WBF expenditures by program area. The retroactive program, which pays cost of living adjustments for fatal or permanent total disability injuries, makes up our largest section with just over 56% of expenditures. And we paid about $39 million in fiscal year 2022. The Reemployment Assistance Program, which helps injured workers return to work faster, comes in second with $25.7 million paid in fiscal year 2022. And this program includes the Employer Injury Program and the Preferred Worker Program. Together, these two programs make up almost 95% of the WBF program costs. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in detail later. The Reopen Claims Program paid about $3.3 million in fiscal year 2022. This program reimburses insurers and self-insured employers for certain costs that arise after a worker's aggravation rights have expired. And then finally, the smallest section includes several small programs, including the Workers with Disabilities Program, wages for multiple jobs, and claims payments for dissolved self-insured groups. And this group paid about $1.45 million in total. All right, next slide, please. All right, as promised, here's a little bit more detail on the retroactive program. Since 1986, the number of total claims has generally decreased. That's the gray line that you see there, while the average payment per claim has generally increased. And the reason for this, so we're seeing a few new claims enter into this program, which causes the claim count to decline as older claims fall out of the system. But we're also seeing the steady increases in cost per claim because the benefits are based on state average weekly wage, which generally increases over time as inflation increases. Next slide, please. This slide shows the percent of retroactive program claims by decade of injury. And as you can see, about 60% of the claims being paid out of this program have injury dates before 1990. So although there are still new claims entering the program, the frequency with which they enter has dramatically declined in recent years. So for example, during the 1970s, there was on average one new fatal or permanent total disability claim each day. But over the last decade, there was less than one claim each week. So again, very dramatic decline in the amount of workers that are using this program just because of the nature of our disabling claims. So in 2021, worker benefit fund payments were made on 1,691 claims with an average payment of $23,285 per claim. Next slide, please.
Chair Priest, if I may.
Yeah, before you go on, Scott has a question.
Sure.
Is there any, the decrease in the rate of those claims, do we know, is that because these injuries aren't occurring because of the safer work environment that we have, or is it that they may occur, but they're not funneling their way through the workers' compensation system?
Largely, it's because we have fewer claims that fall into this category. We've got fewer fatal and fewer permanent total disability claims because of the safer work environment. I don't know if there are fewer individuals going into this program, but from what I do know, the large percentage is because of just the fewer number of claims.
Thank you.
Yep.
You know, I just tagging onto that, Kelly, is I was wondering, there are none in the 2020s. So zero.
Yes, so we're, and that is, I think, listed out.
So how does somebody apply for this?
Front of me at this exact moment.
She just has to start talking so the camera.
Co-chair priest, I'll look at the camera. It's
There we
awkward
go.
for me to look at the camera and not screen where you are, but I'll look at the camera. So by statute, insurers are required to pay the benefit amount, and then they are allowed to request reimbursement then from the division for the portion that's reimbursable. So.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Sally. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, next. Oh, one more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Kelly. I was going to wait till the end, but since questions have started, I thought I can go ahead.
That's okay.
The reserve is quite extensive, over mandate, over double mandate. Is there any consideration of lowering that rate, or how are the excess funds invested, or what do we do with those?
Sure. So the goal of the fund, yes, it is above the current threshold in terms of the minimum. The kind of the mindset, and the director and Sally can probably answer in terms of more of a political answer than I can provide, but essentially the idea is to not drastically change the assessment amount so that it would dramatically reduce the amount that's in there, just because we don't know exactly what might be happening. We might come into a recession, which would reduce the number of workers in that would be paying into the program, which would naturally drop that revenue generation. So keeping a healthy enough balance in there to help mitigate some of those potential unknowns is a reasonable thing to do. The assessment rate right now is at its lowest that it's ever been. So it's kind of a yo-yo effect. If you don't want to drop it too much so that the rate is so close, then you have to hike rates back up and potentially, cause financial burden on either employers or workers if you have to increase those rates too much. So it's kind of a balancing act in that regard.
Right, and I understand all that, but we're over double. So what's
Sure,
happening with
yeah.
the excess funds?
That is a great question. I can write that down and get back to you on that.
Great, thank you.
I thought it was a good question too, and I think it would be valuable for us at MLAC to maybe hear that at the next meeting. I don't know if that could be a department update rather than it just going to Sarah.
Sure, let me write that down real quick. Okay, I'll make sure to get that, the answer, nice robust answer for you for the next meeting. Any other questions?
This is Andrew, just to jump there. There is a slide, a couple slides back, that does show kind of the history comparing the fund balance to the 12-month. And you can see only if you want to maybe scroll back a couple slides, you'll see, keep going. We haven't always been in this spot, and we'd be happy to come back to the next meeting and talk about this. Every year we do, keep going back. Every year we go right there. So you can see where we were a few years ago, where it was under 12-month line. Every year we do some pretty analysis.
Hey, Andrew, I can only hear every other word that you're saying. I don't know if it's just me, but.
Oh, I'm sorry, but we'll be happy to come back at the next meeting and explain how.
Okay, I heard that you'd be happy to come back, and that's wonderful. And I was thinking about this slide as well. So thank you for asking to go back, because I was remembering that. So it looks like over almost like a 20-year period, there is a period of maybe 1 year where you had less than 12 months in reserve, but it never was a deficit over 20 years. So it's always kind of at around that or higher than that. So Scott, you've got questions.
Thank you, Chair Priest. I believe what Director Stolfi was trying to say, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is that the analysis is done and that we've had times where we've had this much of a surplus that then ended up in a deficit rapidly because of market conditions and whatnot, as is evidenced by the 2008 surplus. I believe maybe what he's trying to reference, but that they will have a nice report on that with more information at the next meeting. Hopefully that captured some of it. Those were the bits and pieces that I was hearing.
Okay. Andrew says sorry for the sound. It's all right. It's all right. And thank you, Scott, for your magical powers of being able to parse the words or read lips. I don't know, but I look forward to that. All right, Kelly, I'm sorry that we interrupted your flow, but I guess
No, it's okay.
back to your question or your presentation.
Yeah, not a problem at all. I'm happy to answer any more questions if you have any at this time, or I mean any other time. I can be flexible. So, and if not, we're on slide 7. Okay. All right, so the next program that we have is the Reemployment Assistance Program. The two main programs here are the Employer at Injury and the Preferred Worker programs. So the Employer at Injury program facilitates the early return to work of injured employees through wage subsidies and worksite modifications. This program is designed to help workers perform transitional work within that worker's limitations from their injuries, and it accounts for about 75% of the Reemployment Assistance Program's expenditures. And then the remaining expenditures are for the Preferred Worker Program, which helps qualified Oregon workers with permanent restrictions from on-the-job injuries who can't return to their regular employment because of those injuries. So in addition to wage subsidies and worksite modification, the Preferred Worker Program also provides premium exemptions for 3 years and claim cost reimbursements as incentives for employers to hire and retain preferred workers. All right, next slide. All right, this slide shows the Worker Benefit Fund liability, which is how much we are anticipating the WBF would have to pay for folks currently receiving some type of benefit through the Worker Benefit Fund through the end of their claim. So this graph just shows our estimates for future liability back through fiscal year 2014. So this is just an indication of each year what we were expecting at that point in time. Our most recent forecast, which was through the end of June 30th, 2022, projects just over $850 million in future liability. All right, next slide, please. And here we show a breakdown of the program's expected liability. As you can see, the retroactive program makes up the majority of the expected future liability, largely because of the length of time each worker or their beneficiaries is paid through this program. All right, next slide, please. And finally, here's a breakdown of the administrative costs to operate these programs. The majority of the costs are for DCBS administration, which includes shared services, WCD, WCB, and the Ombuds Office for Oregon Workers. In total, these come out to just over $6 million for fiscal year 2022. We also have the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences funds. These are for workplace safety research. These totaled $1.9 million in fiscal year 2022. And then finally, our Bureau of Labor and Industries funds, which make up 6% of the admin costs. And these are used for investigation of workers' compensation retaliation, and totaled about $474,000. And that is all I have for you. So thank you for your time. I can answer any other questions that you may have that you didn't ask ahead of time.
All right. Any other questions for Kelly? All right. Well, it was a very good presentation and it generated comments. So thank you very much for bringing this to us, and we look forward to the follow-up. Tammy, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand a little bit, or no? No. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we will move on to the legislative review then. Thank you very much for your presentation, Kelly. And the first item on the agenda is Senate Bill 418. That's this was not discussed in full last time, and so we're bringing it back. Is there scheduled presenters, Kara? I don't have a list of who to call on, but.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, you've got, you should have a proposed -1 amendment that is from AFSCME that Joe Basler is going to talk about here in just a second. We also provided an analysis from the division on the amendments. The amendments replace the entire bill, so you can look at the amendments as if they were standing alone. So, and Joe is the only person so far we've heard from that wanted to speak, but there may be others after he's done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joe, for coming today.
Oh, thank you so much. Joe Basler asked me. Yeah, so we took when we presented, not last MLAC meeting, but the MLAC meeting before, we tried to take all the feedback we heard from the employer side and really try to change the bill to address those concerns. I appreciate that there's still cost to the employers through this system, but I would sort of like flag that for some of the worker position, it is really there's already a cost on our folks who are having to take their pay time off to go and continue to get treatment. And so what the amendment does now, sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of myself, pretty much just takes away the 4-hour limit before you're allowed to get time loss of the 66 2/3 in order to go and get your physical therapy, your doctor's visits, your treatment. Because as I think we mentioned before, a lot of times folks are doing that in an hour, 2 hours to get their physical therapy, and then having to go back. And sometimes they're having to do that 2 or 3 times a week. And they're burning a lot of their own time, or if they have time. So I think it has two. One, employees are taking a hit to their own earned paid time off, or they're not going to the doctor or not going to physical therapy. And I think that's also a pretty bad result. So what we're trying to do is incentivize workers to go continue to get their treatment, and also not sort of place the burden entirely on the worker. So, you know, the original bill, too big. I want to make very clear, LC drafter, not their fault. I didn't explain it well enough in my request. And so we really tried to take the input we got and make it a lot better. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I know I've talked to SAFE. They would like to have another amendment to let implementation happen. They had one line amendment I've already submitted to Senator Gorsuch, who put the bill in for us originally, and we notified the chair of the committee. And they also wanted another amendment to sort of delay implementation until January 1. We're fine with that too. So we really appreciate it. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but we were really trying to get at the requests that were made of us.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really think you did. I don't see any hands raised from the caucus, but one of our stakeholders has their hand raised. Does anybody on the caucus want to ask a question before I call on the stakeholder? Okay, seeing none. David Berenberg has raised his hand from SAFE.
Hi, and I'm trying to put my video on, but it doesn't seem to want to work. So
there you go. We can see you and hear you.
Oh, okay. And you can see my dirty, my messy office space. Thank you, Chair. And we are just finalizing an analysis of what the potential costs are of this. And I think responding to a little through the chair to what Joe said, numbers are agnostic, that there's a cost to the system, and the question for MLAC is who pays for the cost. So we, as Mr. Basler said, they've narrowed the bill to sort of the universe of workers that have received disability payments. And so we looked at in our analysis 3 buckets. They're the workers who are completely off work and receiving time loss benefits. And that group had something like 70,000 medical visits last year. And that group's already receiving time loss. So, they sort of come out of our analysis. And then for workers performing modified work who had an open disabling claim, there were something like 32,000. And we will provide you with these numbers. We're just finalizing and reviewing. And so I'm sorry, I'm presenting this mostly verbally without a nice PowerPoint slide. 32,000 medical service visits. And then for workers performing regular work who had an open disabling claim. So that means, they had been on out of work and now are back to work, to their regular work, but have ongoing appointments. There's something close to 61,000 medical service visits. So we try to analyze the places where applying the average weekly wage in the state and reducing that to an hourly and applying that to really the second 2 buckets, the folks modified work on a disabling claim and for workers who had an open claim but were back at work. And we came out with how much in the 0 to 4 hours to cover the folks who aren't currently receiving the 4-hour coverage there, what would the cost be? And, it worked out to something at average weekly wage, $1.9 million per hour. So if the average was people were out of work for an hour, it would cost, this is just for SAFE, so we're 55% of the system. So about $1.9 million, or if they were out for 3.75 hours, the cost is something like $7.2 million. And then there are a bunch of caveats to this analysis. And, we can't determine whether appointments occurred on a scheduled day off or before or after a worker's shift, whether the employer paid the worker for the missed time, or whether the worker had sufficient earnings that no such time loss would be due. So those are our some of our known unknowns, in doing this analysis. So while there aren't exact numbers and it's hard to prepare, we just wanted to sort of give a magnitude from what our analysis of this was. To put the numbers in perspective, SAFE spent, and this is on an annual basis, and that the last year SAFE paid out about $77 million for time loss and disabling claims. And the total claims cost for medical and time loss for disabling claims was about $200 million. So that's to put the numbers in a system perspective. So again, it was like $1.9 million per hour, and then in that range of how many hours are going to be utilized. So that I just wanted to provide the perspective of what our analysis is, and we're still fine tuning it, and we'll present this in a written form to the committee. And I'm happy to have Dan Schmeling, who supervised the analysis, who's also on the line, answer detailed questions if there are any from the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, David. And I guess I'll look and see. Nobody's hand is raised. I don't know. So are there a couple by magic? There they go. So Scott is first on my screen. I'll let him go first.
Thank you, Chair Priest. I guess I had a question about kind of the methodology for how the number was derived. I don't know if we have someone available who could speak to that.
I think he mentioned somebody that was on the line. David, is that Dan Smelling?
Yeah, Dan Schmeling, you know, the number was divided by, I'll take a quick shot and then you hear me. We looked at the number of appointments for those different categories. And then for the ones that are less than, that we weren't picking up, they weren't in the category where we were, you know, paying the time loss already for all appointments, only the ones that were over 4 hours. And then we took the number of appointments and, you know, multiplied it times the average weekly wage, broken down into an hourly rate. And for more, if you want more specifics, I'm happy to have Dan to weigh in.
Dan, did you have anything more to add to that, or did David explain it really well?
Well, I guess he explained it really well. If there's no questions, if there's questions, I'd be more than happy to take a stab at it myself.
Okay, well, we have 2 questions. I don't know if they're regarding this because their hand was already raised, but I'll go ahead and go in order. Tammy, you are next on my screen.
Thank you. I don't have questions specifically related to what Dave and Dan were talking about. So if Lynn does, and when Lynn wants to go before me, nope, hers are different as well. So, okay, I do have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask both, you know, Chair Patrick and Scott, both of you guys, as well as Joe. As an employer, for me, what we tell our light duty workers is, as long as you work 6.5 hours a day in an 8-hour light duty day, we just pay the full wage. We don't reduce and pay TTD for, you know, that hour and a half. Under this bill, I'm wondering about if I can still do that. If they have to lose their regular wage for that short period of time and be paid TTD instead, that's a concern. And, you know, most of my workers are super diligent. They try to get back in that hour and a half, and I never have any problem. But I do have a few that they disappear for 4 or 5 hours. And then when we contact the doctor's office, their appointment took like 48 minutes or something. So I'm wondering what the provision is for, you know, an outlier claim. Uh-oh, did I just lose you guys?
No, we can still see and hear you, Tammy.
Okay, that's weird. I lost my whole screen. Okay, there you guys are. Anyway, I'm wondering if there's a provision for that, you know, how we can prevent that. And if the employer can still pay the full wage to a worker if we choose to do that. And has there been any talk of negotiation? I mean, going from 4 hours to 0 hours is kind of extreme. And I'm wondering about 2 hours, if we can go 4 hours to 2 hours. So I guess those are 3 questions up for discussion, please.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's pretty small change in the law. Like it's pretty small elimination, just a couple of words. So I don't think it actually changes current practice of any employers right now. Could be wrong, but I don't think so. I would say, just to also give you a heads up, I mean, my folks are pretty mad at me that they're not getting their full wages for the time they're taking off for injuries that they occurred on the job. So I hear what you're saying, that going down to 0 from 4 hours may feel extreme on your end. On my end, I'm getting a lot of folks who are real, and my delightful, wonderful members who I love all very, very much, have no problem telling me how I failed them on a daily basis. So I hear what you're saying. I think what we were trying to do is, it's hard for us to judge, like maybe people don't have appointments that are less, but maybe it's a telehealth, maybe it only takes a half an hour. Some employers do a great job and do cover their employees time away from work. Some employers don't. And I think we were trying to find a way to sort of get to what our folks have been saying is a significant problem, but without going too far or going crazy. But yeah, I'm happy. That's sort of where we're at.
Thank you, Joe. Tammy, you had asked in your question about the chairs as well. Did you want, Scott and I I mentioned it briefly that was something we talked about, but we didn't decide anything, but I don't know, I at least broached that was in our own management caucus. We talked about going
2
from
hours?
4 to 0.
4 to 0 or 4 to 2?
Yeah, I just mentioned that
Yeah, we
was
talked-
something that at least the management side was thinking about, you
Okay.
know.
Yeah, the figures that David presented are quite staggering. And so that's one of the reasons, and just the incentive for the worker is another reason. And I want to also make sure the worker doesn't lose benefits in getting a full wage instead of an average, instead of their TTD rate. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Lynn, you are patiently waiting. You're the last one with your hand raised so far. Oh, I can't hear you though. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I think first, if I may, to Joe, I just want to say thank you for listening to the concerns that were raised and modifying the bill. I think there are still some issues that would need to be worked out, and I hope some additional time will be put into that. Like, what happens if somebody's scheduled for overtime? How does that affect the wage in this case, and the issues that Tammy raised? And it's got an emergency clause, and I can't imagine anybody could implement this on passage, with any kind of smooth transition from 4 hours to 0 hours or 2 hours or whatever it ends up being. So I just wanted to make sure there was willingness to work those issues through before this went any further.
Oh, and I talked to David and Safe, and I think an implementation at the date that they requested in January 1, we're open to that. We're fine with that change.
Thank you, Lynn. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Thank you. I had one just follow-up question, then I'll call on Scott. Hey, Joe, you had mentioned that there was something you talked to Safe, and there was something you were going to put into place. Was it the effective date, or was it something else?
No, I'm not gonna lie. David sent me an email and said, "Hey, we need this one line around notice," and he said, and I said, I sent it to our attorneys to look at, and they said it didn't seem that big a deal, and so I actually put it in. What it was, I did on trust a little bit with David. That might have been stupid. I hope not.
Well, he knows his stuff. So thank you, Joe, for clarifying that. And Scott, sorry for taking some of your time.
No, I'd be happy to start by, I saw that Mr. Barenberg's hand went up. I don't know if we want a quick response from him, Mr. Chair, first before I ask my separate question.
Sure, that would be nice. It would flow nice. Thank you, Scott.
Very quickly, and thank you, Joe, for your willingness to clearly to work with us all on this, was just a line that tried to ensure that there wasn't a conflict with the notice requirements for the ending of time loss that was inserted in the legislation that was passed last session on time loss, that we wanted to make sure an individual appointment didn't trigger the complex notice requirements. And that's something that I know that Elaine Schooler on our staff had also run by the trial attorney. So it was just an amendment to keep a conflict from occurring with unintentionally with another section of the statute that takes effect January 1st.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you, Scott. Your patience is appreciated.
Thank you, Chair Priest. I guess the question that I had was sort of probably best answered by Safe. I appreciate that they've kind of put a number and have a methodology to try and put a number on this. I think contextualizing that number is really helpful. So I would really look forward to any kind of written analysis on that so that I can compare that and dig into that. On the double click, I guess the question would be sort of when we can expect that, because I think that that's really helpful in understanding the issue and understanding as a percentage. You know, as a single number, me as an individual may find that to be surprising one way or another, but as I think as SAFE kind of presented already, that system-wide, it seems like a kind of small percentage of the total cost. But I'd love that number or all of those numbers to be able to kind of dig into that and see the methodology, because I think too, I believe it was Joe's point kind of opening this, that, and I know I'm a broken record, when the injury occurs, we're in a zero-sum game, right? So it's this idea that if it's $1.9 million per hour, the question is, who's going to pay that? Is it the insurer, the worker, or the employer? And I think that that's really interesting too, because to me, the lens that I look at that through, and I know I brought this up before, is the cost of $1 to each one of those parties is very different, especially when you figure out how the party's going to pay for that. So that an injured worker putting it on a payday loan will pay maybe 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 times that amount of money as an insurer or employer would. So I think having those numbers so that I can kind of begin to play with that would be great, and some methodology as well. So very roundabout way of saying, do we have an estimated time when we would have a kind of written version of those numbers?
Go ahead, David. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about a day or so. I mean, we're just, first saw these numbers yesterday, and, we just want to put them in a format and just make sure we didn't miss something in what we do. So it's imminent.
Yeah, I want to, there's a nice comment in the chat from Tammy, and I just wanted to make sure it's in the record. And I agree with thanking Joe for his approach to working with us on this bill. What a wonderful approach. So thank you, Joe. And then I also wanted to thank David and SAFE, that I think it's quite amazing that they were able to come up with a dollar amount at all in such short notice. And so I think I'm sure that there were some people that worked late and really tried hard to put this together. So I just want to recognize that as well, because it seems like data is driving a lot of the decisions that we've been making. Seems important to us. And so having the data is nice. Before I call on the next people with their hand raised, I wanted to ask, while we're on this topic, the bill analysis that was given to us was nice. I appreciated getting a bill analysis. And in there, they said it was not knowable. They said claim costs may increase, but it wasn't knowable. And so I was just curious. I noticed the person that wrote the bill analysis is on the line, and to call on them or somebody from DCBS to say, do they have any thoughts about what was presented in terms of, does it seem reasonable to them, since they were analyzing the bill?
Mr. Chair, I think the reason it was not knowable to the division is because that's something the insurers are keeping track of. So we would have deferred to SAFE and other companies and self-insured employers to provide that information. So I think that was the unknowable part from the department's point of view, is we don't have the data about how they're paying for time loss or being intimately involved in claim processing. So
yeah. Does the division take any exception to the number? I mean, does it seem reasonable to the division?
Not sure we're prepared to comment on that, since there were a lot of numbers and we need to see something in writing.
Okay.
I think that's SAFE's perspective. SAFE gets to represent their claims costs, and of course any other self-insured employer or private insurer should weigh in if they have information on the topic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry to put you on the spot, but it's all we're asked to.
Sorry, that's our job.
Quickly. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to call on caucus members first, and Lynn was the first one with her hand raised.
Thank you, Patrick. And this is for Joe, if I may. It seems to me we only saw this bill for the first time at the last meeting, and now we're, rushing to, we understand there's legislative deadlines and rushing to get this information. Is there a reason it didn't come to us earlier? I mean, the longer we have to work on the bill, I think the more thorough we can be in making decisions about it. So that's my question. Could we
I
have
mean,
seen
I
it
think-
earlier?
I mean, part of it is, I'll be honest. One, we had working on a lot of different legislative priorities, and I think we obviously should have come to MLAC sooner. I also say that, MLAC's not the most approachable, accessible system if you don't know anything about workers' comp. And so, I mean, I know a little bit from working on a couple of other bills with some other folks, but it's not, a little bit of it's like, oh yeah, we got to do MLAC. It's, I lobby a lot. We move a lot of legislation. This is one of the few where there's a separate non-elected group that has significant amount of input on legislative processes. So I apologize, and I think we'll try to get better. And if we have anything else that ever impacts workers' comp, we'll come much earlier. But it was a little bit of like juggling. Frankly, we also didn't know who was going to be in the legislature or who was going to be governor, and that frankly radically changes our legislative agenda. And so that's just that. That is the most honest answer I can possibly give you.
All right, thank you. Did that answer your question, Lynn?
Yeah, I made that mistake myself once a long time ago and never repeated it. So may that be the case for you too.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, Sarah, you are the next caucus member with your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Patrick. Could we get a clarification on the overtime question that Lynn previously asked? And then I have another question as well.
Would that be to Joe Basler, the
Just the intention, how overtime would be computed in this, or if someone worked overtime, would that count? Would that be part of it?
Yeah, I see Joe went off mute. He's got.
I'm not sure. I was going to say. I mean, my understanding is, I guess it would, like, if you're off for 5 hours, how does overtime affect it then? I think that, I mean, in my mind, we were changing, like right now there's the 66 and 2/3 doesn't kick in until after you've taken off more than 4 hours. So it doesn't seem like it would radically change the policy when you're shifting the time by 4 hours. So I think people who are more educated in how workers' comp works could answer that question better than I could. I'm sorry.
Would that be David then?
Yeah, maybe. David, do you have an answer? Or Dan? He had Dan here too. He brought an expert.
Oops.
David,
I would defer to Dan.
Okay.
Well, I guess that's what our question is too. If the worker's average weekly wage was, let's say, $500 a week, and we're paying time loss benefits based on that $500 a week, and after the injury, the worker's missing time from work to attend a medical appointment, but for that week that they're scheduled for, enough hours to meet the $500 average weekly wage, but then they were also scheduled for overtime because it's a busier season, but they're missing time from work for a medical appointment. So if their post-injury wage was greater than their average weekly wage, but they missed time for a scheduled medical appointment, do we still have to pay time loss for that when normally that time loss benefit would prorate to zero because their post-injury wage was greater than their average weekly wage, the wage that we're basing time loss on from the date of injury?
Well, sir, I don't think it was an answer. Just the question was asked better. So I don't know.
Okay, maybe just food for thought, I think, for stakeholders when they're ironing out details. But my comment in general is, and I think Scott brought this to light too, there is a cost, and I think we're really about who's picking up the cost. So the numbers will be super helpful. And I would like a consideration of meeting somewhere at the 2-hour mark. So thinking through that. And is there any documents of attestation documents that they're actually on an appointment and they're affirming what they're doing now? Or is that something that would be a consideration of this? So I don't know who could answer that.
I think it's you, Joe, but I don't know if there's an answer to that or as well. I don't know. Is that something that you would?
I mean, if there's not attestation documents now, I don't think we'd want to like implement them. I think that's the I wouldn't want to make it harder. I want my bill to like make it actually harder for workers to go and see the doctor. I think that would be problematic.
Yeah, maybe somebody from the division. Kara, is there somebody to call on to see if there's something already in place, or?
I don't think that I'm just, considering teeth to make sure that we're all doing what we're saying we're doing.
Yeah.
So just thought. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank
I
you.
think that question is probably better posed to the insurers who are having to do this now for appointments more than 4 hours. We don't process claims, so
Yeah. Okay.
disadvantage. I wanted to just mark the time, Chair Priest.
Yep, we're at a
11.
1 hour mark, and there's still hands raised. I would like to call on caucus members and make sure they all have the chance to ask their question. And Jill has been patient, and I'll let you ask your question.
And maybe this kind of goes along with the prior question a little bit, and maybe I missed this. It was a question about the data gathering on how the frequency of the employee that's going to their doctor's appointments for less than 4 hours, since it's not compensable. I guess how does that information get gathered?
So David, it seems like you're the best person to answer. Please do so. Then you're muted though. I don't have Scott's magic powers of being able to lip read, but there you go. Thanks.
Well, that's usually how folks in my office want me on calls on mute. But
Yeah.
the member Fullerton, what we did is we took the appointments that we're paying for, so we get the medical bill from the medical provider, and we know that we're not paying the 4 hour part for those. So that was the universe that we used.
Okay, all right, that's appreciated.
Thank you, Jill. That was a good question. Now, in interest of time, there are hands raised. They are not caucus members. Kara, is there any precedent for just moving on and asking the caucus if they are okay with proceeding to the next? Because we have quite a bit of, yeah, John McKenzie, a caucus member, puts in the chat. There's quite a bit of hands up, and I have to run soon, but I have to ask the 2 hour consideration as well of the meeting, I think. Is there any objection to us just moving on?
Yes.
Yeah.
And not that I'm objecting to moving on, but I do want to hear from all of the stakeholders. And so I'm wondering if they could maybe be scheduled to speak next time, because I'd like to hear from Multnomah County and Giovanna and Dustin. Could they be scheduled maybe next time?
To bring it forward, you're recommending that we schedule this to be discussed again at our next meeting.
Yeah, I like to hear from the stakeholders, all the stakeholders. So just to not hear from them is troublesome for me. We don't have to hear from them today, though.
Okay. All right, Jill, you've got your hand raised. Did you mean to have your hand raised? No? Okay.
No, sorry about that. Just didn't put it back down.
Okay. Well, I heard from Tammy. You still have your hand raised, Tammy. Do you have another comment? No? Okay. I hear that there is an interest in hearing from everyone, but not necessarily today. Is it agreeable? Oh, see, Scott, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, Chair Priest, just really briefly, I agree. I like to hear from everyone. I would recommend that folks follow up with kind of emails and other things to stakeholder members as well, so that we can be maybe a little more informed as to the discussion next time as well. Just a thought, but I'm totally fine with moving forward. I think so we make some progress today.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very good discussion. Thank you very much, Joe. You got, everybody's appreciative of you. I'm sorry that we still have questions, but.
Patrick, I've noted the 3 people that have their hands up. You're also welcome to send comments to me that we can distribute to the committee in writing. So if you have those, we're happy to do that. But I do have those 3 down, so we'll just put them at the top of the list for next time.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we will move forward then to the next item on the agenda, which is House Bill 3412, the Physician Associate Authority. And do we have a presenter for that?
I believe Taylor Sarman is here. Yes, he could take his camera off, so take it away, Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I will be brief. I appreciate the analysis that the division has done, and it aligns with the analysis that my client has done on the bill in its current form. So I think we are working with Representative Graber right now to get an amendment drafted that adds physician assistants into a couple of places in statute that I think make sense around MCOs, and then also clarifies the provisions that currently apply to the length of time that physician assistants can see workers. As you read the bill 3412, there's conflict with what would be added to statute and what's currently in statute, and I think we want to change that and are currently working to amend the bill. I think the overall goal is still the same that this committee has heard previously, and that we just want physician assistants to be able to see the workers and patients for the same amount of time that nurse practitioners are able to see patients, so that we can keep continuity of care and access to care top of mind. So that will continue to be our goal. I look forward to coming back to this committee with amendments that achieve those things that I just mentioned. And of course, happy to answer any questions that folks have.
All right, thank you. Are there questions from anyone in the caucus for Taylor? All right, I see none. I guess we will just wait and see you again at our next meeting when you get that information put together. Thank you very much for the update.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the last one on the written agenda, and it's House Bill 3471, Employment Provisions and Settlement Agreements, a status update, and I see Katie Thiessen. Am I saying it right? Thiessen?
Thiessen, no worries.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the switcheroo on the agenda. There were some timing issues that I think are resolved, but I also want to recognize how much time you all spent on this agenda item. It's now House Bill 3471, the no rehire agreements as a condition of settlements. I think really appreciate the feedback from management there. And I think what I took away is sort of maybe a silver lining of that conversation is what I heard a lot of agreement across the board that you all agree that this should be an employment statute and not in workers' comp statute. Super happy to oblige on that in conversation with legislative counsel to make that happen. So again, I think you all spent so much time at the last meeting, which I'm very appreciative of. And so happy to have offline conversations with folks who are in the employment space. You know, I have SAFE on my list just as an ongoing update, OBI, AGC, but please reach out to me if you also want to be included, but also want to be respectful of your all's time, heard you loud and clear. And so to sort of take this in a different direction, but still hopefully achieving the goal to solve that problem. So that I will stop talking.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that update. Are there any questions or comments on that update? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much for that. But I think you are also bringing up the next one, House Bill 3467, Employer Reporting of Injuries.
Great. Yeah, so thanks, Chair. So this is in regards to House Bill 3467, and I will try and talk as little as possible, but just I'd love to talk about the problem and then the bill as it's in its first state here, and then kind of a comparison to what's in rule, and then frankly just have a pretty open conversation about the problem at hand and ways to fix it. I'm really open to like what that needs to look like at this point. So just to level set from the beginning. So the problem here that we're seeing in a lot of different settings, unfortunately, is that a big company is what I've been told is where this is often happening. That is in a fairly dangerous industry. So I've heard warehousing, food processing, construction, these types of industries will often have an on-site healthcare provider to provide care when a worker gets injured, and or call an ambulatory service to do on-site care of that injury. And it sounds like what's happening in a lot of instances now is that that injury is not being reported to, if it's a serious injury, is not being reported to the insurer. So that's one of the problems, and the sort of subsequent problem is that workers are feeling pressured to use that on-site provider when they may feel like they need to go to the hospital to address that injury. So those are the two problems that we're seeing. In the interest of time, I would love to have actual practitioners. I think Kate and Jovan are on the line who've talked to clients on this issue, flush that problem out a little bit more. But I think I know there will be a question around data. Obviously, the data point there, this is pre-claim. So the data point on how often this happens is not something that I have. That would be something that the insurers have. And obviously here we're talking about a lack of reporting. And so it's really unclear what that data point is since the reporting is not happening. And I think we had some of this conversation last time, but I think for it to get to the point of a worker feeling empowered to speak up, just the inherent power differentials there. The industries we're talking about, we're oftentimes talking about low wage, immigrant, non-English speaking workers. So there's just a tremendous number of barriers, I think, oftentimes in a worker speaking up and feeling empowered to talk about this as a problem. So I just wanted to note that as the data piece. I think would love to get some information from the insurers on the reporting on this that's currently happening to try and figure out the deficit. But I think the data deficit is a problem in and of itself. The state does have some data points here in terms of those workers who do understand the system, are savvy enough to understand the system, are empowered enough to speak out. And so I'm calling the workers' comp division, calling BOLI on this issue, saying, my employer pressured me. I wanted to go to the hospital, all the series of reasons. And there's not a ton of data points there. Again, I think for the reasons that I sort of outlined in terms of that is a very empowered worker. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. Sarah, I see your hand up. I'm going to get to the solution. Do you have a question sort of on the problem?
I would ask that we direct things through the chair. We had talked about that at the beginning, if that's okay.
Great.
I was going to ask you though, you mentioned some other people. Are they part of your presentation before we get started with questions, or is it just people that you feel like are they, testifying? I don't know if there's any, I just want to make sure I understood that part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm obviously an advocate, and so mostly just want to always defer to the experts in terms of the folks who've had conversations with workers experiencing these issues. So that is Kate and Giovanna in this instance. If other people also have, direct instances, please speak up. But yeah, thank you, Chair, for that reminder. You can interrupt me at any time to call on folks with questions. So,
okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think so. That was the end. So you're ready for questions now. And you called on Sarah. So I'll follow.
I would like to talk about the solution, but if there's a specific question on what I've already said, then happy to answer it now or later.
Okay. Well, Sarah, is it about what she's been talking about already?
Thank you, Chair Patrick. We could consider her solution. I'm just wondering if there is not already a solution in place, and
that's what I'm getting to. So probably good to hold, and happy then to.
Chair Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and let her finish. I want to make sure that we have everything presented. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it. Yes, because it is sort of like a tangled solution here. So that's the problem. Maybe we'll come back to Kate and Giovanna to flesh that out a little bit more. To the question that was just raised. Again, open to feedback here, and first want to really thank SAFE when we reached out about this issue. I'm engaging in a conversation about what's already in place and rule and what the bill does. Yes, I can share my screen. So I pulled together just a little grid on what's in the bill, the base bill, House Bill 3467, that's on the left, and what is already in rule. And again, really appreciate Safe and the conversation that we've had already here. So I think to Sarah's question, there is a lot already in rule that's in this bill. So that's why I'm very open to feedback and to frankly just have a conversation about this problem and how to move forward. So, what's already in rule that's also mirrored here in the statute is reporting the injury not later than 5 days. The rule currently doesn't have an affirmative reporting spelled out, but it says when an employer is not required to notify. So I think there's, a fairly easy sort of understanding already in rule of then, what should be reported. And so the bill matches that. Employer is not required to report in accordance with this section if the injured worker requires no medical treatment or only first aid treatment from a medical service provider. And so, here it says licensed medical service provider, but that's fairly consistent. Report shall include, and we got this right from the same statute, so not a big change there. I think the biggest change here for what's in the proposed bill versus what's in rule already is probably just flushing out what the worker should know and be told when an injury occurs. So seek medical treatment for the accident or injury from a medical service provider of the worker's choice, has the right to file a claim, and the choice of medical. So, I think that's all implied in the rule, but maybe just making that a little bit clearer so workers know their rights and that they're told, we have this on-site provider, but you can seek care elsewhere. And then this first aid piece, I probably won't linger on too much. Again, thankful for SLAFE here. I think our intent with this bill was to not create a system where employers were having to report, minor cuts and Band-Aid situations. Like that feels not what the intent of what we want to do is. And I think David brought up a good point around that sort of already in rule. It's when that's sort of taking away, frankly, what's already in rule, because anytime a licensed medical provider sees a worker that's supposed to be reported. So happy to have ongoing conversations there. And it sounds like in the past, I don't know if any of you were on at this point, but first aid was defined in rule in the past, and then that was removed. So happy to have that conversation, but I think that's a little more granular than the broader bill in terms of, yes, there are protections already in rule, but these problems are still, it's obviously not fully being complied to. And so what's the answer there? And so again, this is where, is it codifying in statute? I think that could be a helpful tool potentially to raise this as an issue. Not married to that. Is it informing workers of their rights? Is it adding a report to the workers' comp division so that this data is better accessible for all of us? I think there's compliance issues here for sure that I just kind of want to open up for the group. So hopefully that was helpful. I will stop talking. If we have time, would love for Giovanna and or Kate to quickly flesh out, what they're hearing directly from workers to be that expert. But I will go ahead and stop there. And
Thank you
I'll
very
stop
much.
sharing my screen too.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katie, for that description and a visual display. That was helpful. I appreciate that as well. And so I will call on the caucus members first. And then, and I would ask people if they had interest in hearing from the stakeholders. I mean, say, I need more information about the problem. I mean, that would be helpful too. So we'll start with, Scott had his hand raised first.
Thank you, Chair Priest. Yeah, just a quick question. So I know that it sounded like we don't really have information through WCD on kind of data on how frequently this occurs. Would it be possible to get the information from, say, for insurers or self-insureds, or are there any of those folks currently on that could provide us that information or that data? Because I think that would be helpful, especially if we don't, if we don't have access to that through one path, can we, are there other subject matter experts and folks that do this that could provide that information either right now or could they provide that to us shortly?
I think, yeah, is there somebody from the division? You're asking the question of the people from DCBS, right, Scott? No?
Either DCBS, if we have that information, or if there's insured, self-insured, and other folks that do have that information that they could provide that in the meeting. So sort of open to whomever, wherever the data lies, that it reveal itself.
So the division does have complaint data that AFL did request from us, and we can forward. I can forward what I sent to Katie. It is regarding direction of care and inducement not to file claims, and those come in sometimes through Bureau of Labor and Industries referrals or directly to us. And as Katie mentioned, we don't get a lot of complaints. But if there are other stakeholders that have input, they should chime in when that's appropriate.
I think I would call on, I see David Berenberg has his hand raised and he is an insurer, so I think he'd be the right one to answer that.
And the answer is we don't have information on claims we don't have. Though I know, a suggestion that I'd heard had been, and this isn't something, the insurer would do, but comparing the OSHA 300 logs versus filed claims to see if there are any discrepancies with employers.
Okay, good.
And Mr. Chair Priest, if I may, maybe expanding it to if there's major employers on here as well that have that kind of information internally, sort of whomever has the information, wherever it is, it would be great to get that. Or if anyone knows where we could get it.
Okay, yep. Casting a wide net. Let's see, there are people on the call. I don't know them all. Is there anybody from a major employer that has information? Tammy Bowers. Tammy Bowers.
Okay, I don't know if I'm going to answer this correctly, Chair Scott, but if you're talking about like the OSHA 300 log and everything that's on the 300 log as far as like an incident that maybe was a first aid versus what is reported. Because we are self-insured, we regularly get audited by OSHA every couple of years, and they always look at our OSHA 300 log. They review that and to make sure that we did that correctly. And we are required by law every single year to do the survey, the OSHA survey that we send into the federal government that looks at our Oregon OSHA logs, and they go over that in fine detail and call me if anything is amiss. I don't know if that's the kind of data that you're talking about, but since we're not a medical facility, we don't have like a needle stick, for example, that would go on the log. But I do have truck drivers that might have a bloodborne pathogen exposure at a truck stop and need a hepatitis immunization for free, which isn't filing a claim, and that does go on the log, and they're extremely rare. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I'm gonna go off mute because I still have a question. I just wanted to answer him first.
Okay, well, there's a lot of hands raised. Did that answer your question, Scott? Was that helpful?
I think that's insightful for that kind of scenario, and I think that may help kind of begin to narrow down where we could get some of the data. But I'm really looking. I mean, if there's any other avenue that we have where we could get kind of a number of how often this occurs. I don't know if we have a larger, an even larger employer. I know, like giant warehouse folks a lot of times have, private clinics on site. And if it's my understanding of the bill and the issue, that's maybe more what this is geared towards. Yeah, or if there's other self-insureds or third-party administrator or someone that could kind of speak to that. I think Tammy, for her input on that, I think that's insightful and helpful in kind of beginning to frame where we can get more information on that data.
Okay, so I just touching a little bit, Chair Scott, about this. We have hostlers at Georgia Pacific, And there are several different Georgia Pacific sites that have a nurse on site. And the nurse at one of them is really close to, or the Georgia Pacific site at one of the facilities is very close to town. You can get, ambulance out there immediately. Another one is very far away. It's like 45 minutes to get an ambulance out there. So they have on-site people that will, that are trained like ENTs and nurses, and they will treat and get them emergency care. It's up to the injured worker if they want to go in to see the nurse or if they want to go see their own doctor. They just know that there's a delay. So a lot of times they go straight to the nurse's office and kind of get patched up. Yes, you're going to need stitches. Let's get you into the emergency room or to your own doctor. And for me, I have just a handful of hostlers on site. So this happens like once every, 5 years. I wouldn't be able to give you data on how often it happens at the Georgia Pacific for their employees.
Thank you. Scott, I don't know Amber McMurray, but Multnomah County sounds like a large employer, and her hand went up since you started speaking. So I don't know if Amber, you had data to offer, Scott.
Hi there. So I don't actually have specific data, but what I can tell you is there is some things that are concerning about it in that this is requiring that employers file a claim. And we have many, many employees that don't want to file a claim. And so we say it's the employee's right to file, but it's also the right not to file or to withdraw a claim. So you're anticipating the employer incurring the costs of filing claims for people who don't want claims. And in addition, what really spurred me to kind of comment was Tammy mentioning the needle sticks. We have an entirely separate process, a bloodborne pathogen process that is compliant with OSHA, and that the employee loses no time from work or anything like that to go receive medical treatment. And those folks, it's a whole different process and they don't actually file a claim. So this bill requiring the employer to file a claim kind of, it double talks. So it says we give them the right to file the claim, but it's not saying that they have the right not to file the claim. And you're putting a lot onto an employer that isn't necessarily theirs. And I understand there is an issue about it. I do get that. And the county, I don't think we don't have any on-site medical anymore that we allow our employees to see. But I know there are employers that do, and I know that's an issue with not reporting and underreporting. So I don't know how to take care of that other than to say the employee also has the right not to file the claim, because I don't like that it specifically says employers must do this. And I don't know how you get around that.
Okay, thank you, Amber, for that. Sarah, you are the next person in the caucus with your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Priest. And Katie, thank you for the side-by-side slide. I think that's appreciated, or it is appreciated, because you can see the differences and there don't seem like a lot. So to me, I'm wondering if it is an enforcement issue and statute could take care of it. And if that's happening, why aren't we using the tools to go after that bad actor employer versus, creating a whole new regime or regimen that every employer must follow? That's kind of point one. And two, I'm not sure I like the employer participating in the claim determination. I prefer the insurer to take care of that as well. So I don't know, just food for thought that if it's an enforcement issue and there's already statute in place and it's only very large employers who have this on-site facility issue, maybe we could deal with them individually.
Yeah, Katie, go ahead. I see that you have a response to the
question. Thank you so much. I actually just have a clarifying question. Sarah, I think you're talking about, in terms of that second point, whether the employer recommends or opposes acceptance of the claim and the reasons therefore. Is that the section that you're talking about?
Sorry, I believe it's stating that the employer must file, and you're giving them the power to determine the claim in a way, and I prefer the insurer to determine claim instead of putting it on the employer to do that. I think there's some gray area there. And I just think, there's so many similarities between the bill versus what's already in statute that I think we could be creative and deal with it in statute already.
Yeah, and thank you for that quick clarifying question. What's on the right in that grid is in rule, not in statute.
In rule,
yep.
but statute rule, there's systems in place that that already deal with that. Thank you.
Totally. And I appreciate that feedback for sure. I guess the one sort of clarifying comment I will have, and I think Giovanna, as a practitioner, might be able to shed some more light on this, is in the bill. It says an employer shall report any claim or accidents that may result in a compensable injury. So I think part of that or accident piece is creating a paper trail early. So then, and Giovanna can definitely speak with so much more clarity on this. So then when a claim is filed later on, that there's a marking of when the accident and injury happened, which is sort of what's not happening right now.
Chair Priest?
Yes.
I thought there was a 5-day window already in place.
I don't know. I guess that'd be a clarifying thing. I don't know. Katie, you've mentioned Giovanna Patrick several times. Can she clarify this? Is that what you mentioned?
Would love that. Yes.
Okay. All right. Is that all right, Sarah? Do you want to hear?
Sure.
Giovanna, thank you for being here to answer these questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair Priest and the rest of the committee. Again, Giovanna Patrick, claimant's attorney. I was asked to provide some clarifying. I'll start with the question that was just asked and then get into some of what Ms. Thiessen alluded to. Yes, I believe the current rules are that an employer must notify their insurer within 5 days of notice from the worker that they want to file a claim. That I don't think is really the paper trail, and that at least I see missing. Paper trail I see missing is when someone has, an injury that they might not know right away, whether it's super severe. They trip, they fall, they pick something up heavy, whatever it might be. They might not know in that moment whether or not they require medical services. They also might have reasons why they want to delay in seeking medical treatment. They hope they'll get better. They are worried about filing a claim. They're concerned that filing a claim could take them off work for wages or create employment issues. Those are all concerns that workers have, and why sometimes they wait to file a claim. But if there were some sort of requirement for a paper trail or a notice, which a lot of big employers do anyway, I'm sure Ms. Bowers probably has a process for that, for near misses, a lot of them do, and those are probably really good models to use to have for all employers. But what I see happen a lot, especially in these situations where there's either on-site licensed medical providers, or another way this happens a lot is contracts with an ambulance company to come out anytime that a worker reports that they've suffered an injury. There's a lot of problems with knowledge with workers. Workers, they just don't know that they have a choice. They don't necessarily know. I see workers tell me all the time, I went to the employer's doctor. They told me where to go. Or they'll say the opposite, which is, well, I didn't go to the doctor because the employer didn't tell me where to go. I was waiting to hear. So they really don't know the process. They're relying on their employer to help them during, what's a really uncomfortable and powerless time for them when they've been injured. They're not sure if they're going to need treatment that's going to take them off of work. So, one concern when looking at, the way the rules used to be written is the line was a little bit clearer in my mind, which was, if you get treatment with a licensed medical provider, you report it. If it's a Band-Aid given to you from a coworker, non-licensed, then you don't report it. I think that line has gotten a little bit more blurry since the rule took out the definition of first aid in 2017. And perhaps this is a good way to discuss how to make that line a little bit clearer. So, what I see on the on-site medical providers, my clients will tell me, well, I have to go to the nursing station. That's the first step. I have to go to the nursing station. They have to tell me what to do. They have to give me the paperwork. I can't go to the doctor until I have that. That might not be a mandate from the employer. That might be something they just think. It might be an educational problem. But I also hear, I had an employee who worked for a big box delivery store company, and she had a very serious injury. Her and a coworker fell into each other. She fell over a conveyor belt, was on the ground, yelling about how hurt she was. They wheeled her over to the nursing station where she was told that she had two choices. She could, get ice and rest at the nursing station and see if she got better, or she could file a claim. But she needed to know that if she filed the claim, the transfer she had just put in would be stopped because anyone with a claim can't transfer. That worker doesn't feel like she had choice, right? And unfortunately, what happened in her case is she did have a serious injury. She went back to the nursing station for 3 weeks. And then by the time that they said, you need to go to the ER, we can't help you anymore. The ER says, we don't believe you that you hurt yourself because why did you wait 3 weeks to come to treatment? And, those nursing notes aren't necessarily produced. There are notes. In that case, notes finally came out after I requested them again and again. But that was a worker who didn't feel like they had choice, that they didn't feel like they could actually go to the doctor. Even when they were presented with choice, it was done in a way that did not give them power. With regard to ambulance companies, I had a client who hurt himself. On a Thursday, he reported it. They sent him home. Oh, you're hurting, just go home. And then Monday he comes and says, no, I think I need to go to the doctor. He said, well, why didn't you tell us over the weekend? And he says, well, I thought I needed the claim number. I thought I needed you guys to give me all the information so I could go to your doctor. And then they said, okay, well, we'll bring the ambulance company in that we've hired. They have a contract. Some of these big companies have contracts with these licensed medical service providers to come and check you out at the employer's facility. And then you're told, well, you can, rest. I can give you some medicine here, or I can take you in an ambulance in front of all of your coworkers to the hospital. You're going to lose wages. And, as soon as you're done, come on back and we'll figure out what to do next. That person, again, doesn't feel like they have a lot of choice. So creating some additional conversation and rules and reporting requirements so that we can better track when that happens. And also just having a rule will help everyone know and will help those employers who may not be trying to do anything. They may not understand the power dynamic that they have. They may not understand that when they told that worker, you can have treatment here or we'll take you away in an ambulance, what that really felt like for the worker. So having some clear rules about that so that we can track this stuff, I think is great. I also really like the suggestion about WCD's involvement and maybe a difference between filing a claim and reporting an incident. I think maybe we can divorce those two from each other. And we don't want every single claim to be filed with insurance companies, create a whole lot of work for workers and insurers and employers, but some way to track these people who are getting hurt, being, receiving some medical services by a licensed service provider on site or brought into the worker place. And then no one really knows about it. And then it turns into a delay issue and a credibility issue for the worker later. I think it would be very helpful to have that information, and then we could decide what we want to do with it. Or as I think Ms. Dunkwell noted, if there are some bad employers or bad actors or bad industries or places where we could work on this, then we would have that data. So those are my general thoughts, and of course, I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Patrick. Sarah, it all started with a question from you. Did you get the answer to your question in the middle of all that?
I think we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, well, thank you, Ms. Patrick, good information. The next caucus member on my screen is Tammy. We heard from her, but she was responding. You didn't get to ask your question yet. So
yeah, and I don't even know if I responded correctly, but okay. So I do have a question about 3467 on page 2 and page 8. They use the word may. Employers shall report to their insurer in accordance with section 1 of this 2023 Act any claims or accidents that may result in a compensable injury. That word may, I have a huge problem with because of the number of, anything can maybe be a claim. Somebody gets cut, they don't, oh, it's nothing. I'll just put a Band-Aid on it. And 10 days later, it's infected. And so now they need medical care, we file their claim. But it may become a claim later if I have a worker who falls down and they twist their ankle and they're like, oh, it kind of hurts, no big deal. I don't want to go to the doctor. Okay, let me know if you change your mind. And then 10 days later or 2 days later, usually the first 48 hours are the worst, okay, it really hurts. I can hardly put on any weight on it. I'd like to go to a claim or go to the doctor. In situations like that, I mean, I might have 20 of those in a month. And the amount of volume that is going to generate for, me as an employer financially to file the claim, the insurance company, if they have to set something up or my TPA, they're going to enter that in the computer because it might be a claim. I have a huge problem with that word may, even though it does refer back to section 1. I don't know, any claim or accident that may result in a compensable injury, you've just quadrupled my volume, other employers' volume. I would like that carved out a little bit better, please.
All right, thank you. I think it was a great comment. Did you have any feedback, Katie, on that at all?
No, I think that's super helpful. I don't know what the magic sauce is in terms of sort of what you just outlined, Tammy, and what I think Giovanna helped illustrate in terms of creating that paper trail, but super happy to think about that more. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Katie. All right, Tam or Lynn, you've been very, very patient. You've had your hand raised for a long, long time. So I can't wait to hear your question.
I wouldn't be that excited, Patrick, but thank you. Two things. One is I'm trying to square what's on the OSHA 300 log with the kind of paper trail that has been discussed here. And I haven't dealt with an OSHA 300 log in many years, so I really am asking the question, are these kinds of incidents going to be reported in that way? And before somebody goes to answer that, I guess my overall feeling is that I'm hearing this as enforcement, as education, and a potential for additional rulemaking. I guess I'd hate to see another statute that nobody's going to follow, or some people are not going to follow, created if we can solve the problem in a different way. So I will stop and maybe somebody can answer the OSHA 300 question.
Is there anyone on the call that can answer that question? Maybe the division? I don't know. I can't, Lynn. I can't answer that question. All right, so that sounds like a good one. It seems like we've talked a lot about data and not knowing like the scope of the problem. Is there anything that the WCD could do? Is there resources that they have that they could come back to us and help fill in some of the gaps?
Well, Sally's here. She can come up to the table. Well, we'll send you the complaint data that we do get, because that's what we have.
That's what we have. That's what I was going to say. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, and we did compile some data for the last several years on the complaints that we've received and provided that to Katie. We'll provide that to the members of the committee. But if we do not have, we are complaint driven. So if we do not have the complaints, we won't have the data. There's not a current, not a current reporting requirement of some sort. Employers are allowed by statute to have on-site medical facility I think the language is along the lines of to assess the nature and extent of an injury. But there's no requirement that they report to us if they have those facilities. So we don't know which employers have them and which don't. So.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I see no other caucus members with their hands raised, but there is a hand raised from Kate Sussman, and so I will call on her.
Thank you, Chair. Let me raise my hand down here. Okay, hey, I'm Kate Sussman. I'm an attorney at the Northwest Workers Justice Project. We don't do workers' comp law, but we hear from a lot of injured workers, both with questions about process, but also around retaliation. So that's kind of the angle I come from. I wish I could tell you how many calls we get about this, and possibly we have a new case management system that maybe we can filter out a little better. I know anecdotally, we hear from at least a few workers a month with either pressure not to leave to get the care they need, pressure to continue seeing on-site care. And I think what Giovanna mentioned about how that kind of sets workers on a path to making the injury worse, maybe not being believed when they do go see someone off-site. So I have a couple stories. I'll just mention one or two briefly, but I think the distinction someone made between, maybe Sarah Duckwell made, between folks who are in a rural area and maybe really need the benefit of some on-site care, and then folks who are not, but who there's a pressure, there's a power issue where workers are sort of told not to make their own choice and often don't know they have that right. So one brief story is a nursery worker in Salem area. This is an active case of ours. And she lifted really heavy plants every day, like 50-pound plants or so, and started to have pain in her shoulder. There was a very strong encouragement to only use the on-site nurse. She went to the nurse said, well, you should just do different work today. I'll move you to a different job. No claim, no discussion. The pain got worse and worse. Eventually she decided to forego the nurse, which was, a difficult decision for her, but it was just too bad. And they weren't, they didn't have the services on site to deal with her shoulder. So she went to a doctor who said, you need surgery. She then called the nurse to say, hey, I'm going to need my claim number for this comp process that I'm starting here. And she was threatened with firing at that point. And then she actually was fired 3 days later after asking for her claim number. And I don't know, we haven't dug in yet to know, we're currently litigating this. I don't know if there was a claim. We're not really sure if it had been reported, et cetera. But that's a pretty clear example of not a scrape, not a Band-Aid situation, but, someone's shoulder being hurt by repetitively lifting really heavy objects. So I won't tell you my other story because it's such a strange set of facts that it's, for us, it's actually kind of normal. It's a forestry worker who got injured with a chainsaw and literally received care from his supervisor, who is not a doctor. That's a separate thing, so I won't go into it. But from the point of view where we're coming from, this is a really big problem. The pressure to go to on-site care, and then the lack of a paper trail for how many folks are being sort of shunted into that process. So I'll pause there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. I see Sarah has her hand raised again.
Thank you, Chair Patrick. I'm just wondering, like on-site care, I know we probably don't have any data on employers that have that, but I would assume it would be only large employers that could, facilitate that, or super out in the rural area. So I don't know, to me, I think enforcement could really fix this issue because there's already stuff, in place. And I hear the anecdotal stories, and none of them sound pleasing to anybody. So we're sorry that those happen, but why aren't we targeting enforcement? That's my question.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sarah. I would love for.
I'm sorry, that was directed to Chair Priest, so that I think he can direct it elsewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's all right, Katie. I'm happy to call on you. So
thank you. Thank you for that question. Thanks, Chair. And it's one that I really have too, and so I really appreciate the conversation today. I think what may be helpful from the division is, what I see as a problem, maybe that this is just exposing sort of globally, is that right, like the workers' comp division doesn't have much, if any, of an enforcement sort of arm, and OSHA is not tasked with enforcing workers' comp. So it does feel like there's sort of a deficit of whose job it is to enforce this. That's my impression. I will defer to experts though on sort of clarifying that and maybe posing some ideas, because I really appreciate that question, because it's one that I've been grappling with as we talk about this issue.
I Heard somebody speaking, but Giovanna, Patrick's hand is raised. The only one raised, so I will call on you to fill
Thank
in.
you, Chair. Yeah, I think enforcement is certainly something that is a positive thing for this. I think the problem with enforcement right now is it requires the worker to come forward to WCB and say that something's wrong. And a worker who doesn't feel like they're empowered, a worker who, feels like they're being pressured to go to medical treatment, maybe they don't even know that that's wrong, they're not going to go to WCD. And I tell you, I hear a lot of the same stories that Kate does. We both represent a lot of the, most vulnerable workers that there are in Oregon. And what I always hear is, I don't want to lose my job, or my family members work there. I don't want them to lose their jobs. And so finding a worker who both has a story where we think that there's something wrong going on here, and is also willing to stick their neck out there and complain about it, that's, I think, putting the impetus on these vulnerable workers, where at least I would like to see some of that shift to the employer having more, or insurer having more requirements on reporting, so that they think about their actions. It doesn't fall on this worker to say that something is wrong, when the worker, they all really just want to keep their jobs. That's what I hear from my workers. So that's the enforcement piece that I think Ms. Thiessen mentioned that is kind of missing and kind of falling in between the cracks. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I see Scott has his hand raised as well.
Thank you, Chair Priest. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to kind of coalesce a lot of what we've been talking around. I think is this idea of, why this type of enforcement, or why this is necessary. I like the idea of a need to analyze, who has the burden currently to come forward on this, and how that affects the ability of the powers that be to enforce this, and what's being reported, and how it's being reported. I guess I would say, if we're looking at maybe a shift to kind of put the burden of reporting on to employers, or management, or insurers, or some combination there. I know that Tammy had brought up some great points about her concerns about sort of, needing to report theoretical claims, and then how do you determine what is or couldn't be or something. Are there any folks from the management side or insurers that would have kind of a way that we could approach that would be amenable and not too burdensome to management, that might be a possible alternative, not necessarily something that they're coming forward and saying we're championing this as the idea, but at least some sort of middle ground on where we could look to sort of share responsibility with management in a way that's not overly burdensome.
All right, the great question to throw out there. Does anyone among the management caucus or stakeholders have a follow-up to Scott's question? It's a good one. I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for you, Scott. I don't know. I heard somebody say that, it's mainly large employers that would have on-site care, and maybe, I don't know, targeting those and asking questions, a survey, maybe something that WCD could do. I don't know. They have logs or records. I'm not sure. I felt as though it seemed like there seems to be a need for more analysis and thought about where this fits, and how we could evaluate the scope of the problem. I'm hearing that a lot. I'm looking at Kara. I'm sorry, you're the only one that's in the room that says WCD Oregon next to it. So I know you have many other things that you do, but you're our window into all the resources in the division.
Correct. It would help to know, what is it that you're wanting to know? How many large employers have on-site medical?
I don't know, Scott, does that seem like something that would be helpful to you? I don't know, I'm just answering Scott's question.
Chair Priest, I think kind of anything, any act, I'm trying to find the way to phrase it, sort of any mechanism that we have currently, or that we could introduce, that would get us the data that we need to find out the scope of this problem and to start addressing it, because I think we have a lot of sort of anecdotal incidents of this occurring, we don't have access to any data path. And I don't know if this would be even a WCD question, just because the reporting isn't there. So even though WCD probably has, it sounds to me like WCD has definitely the might and ability and all of that, but only when the information is getting to them. And it sounds like the information, there's this gap in the information's not ever being reported to WCD to then be analyzed and processed. So I know it seems to me like this sort of tries to bridge that gap to where there would be some sort of reporting and information flow to some agency that could then kind of analyze this. And I know that Tammy brought up some concerns about, we don't want, we want relevant information pipelined, but we don't just want this like sea of information that is hugely burdensome to management and everybody else. So I'm kind of trying to ask, is there any other proposal from management as a way to address this? Because I know a lot of them are the experts that deal with this sort of the initial steps of the claim process that we don't see every day, the labor members experienced as a worker going through the process, or the labor expert stakeholders experience when everything's broken down after the fact, kind of, but the sort of day-to-day nitty-gritty on that, I'm just looking for any kind of like constructive recommendations from management.
Fair question. I think seems like it's something that will be brought back, and so maybe the management caucus, we do meet and we can maybe talk about it and see if there's something more. I see Sarah has her hand raised. Maybe Sarah has the answer we've been waiting for.
Thank you, Chair Priest and Co-Chair Strickland. I'm wondering if this would be a work group situation where it is, on our work plan, to deal with retaliation, and if workers are feeling, in the situation where they're employed by an employer with an on-site facility, that it's forcing them to go that direction. So is that a potential solution, to get a work group together to kind of analyze and how to better educate and enforce and deal with the retaliation aspect that is in fact on our work plan?
It seems like something that sounds like a solution. It is one. Does that, Scott, what do you think? Do you think is this right for a work group?
I mean, I know that it's sort of, retaliation generally is something that we have in our work plan. And I think if this is one facet of that, I don't know if we want to do kind of a work group on sort of retaliation or, a subcommittee or something like that on retaliation generally, that we could bring some things. But I know I would hesitate to table this issue because it sounds like it is an issue. And I know if it is mostly a codification of what's in reg currently, I would hate to hold this up knowing that there's legislative deadlines approaching. So that's, I think, why I was kind of trying to see if there was any sort of constructive criticism or alternatives that could be discussed either now or, very soon. I know that there are deadlines approaching for this, but I think, there's a lot that could be explored about the retaliation issue.
Sorry, Chair, may I?
Yeah, you go ahead, Katie. Yeah,
thank you. I'm just trying to synthesize in live time here. So I guess I just maybe want to do a temperature check. Really appreciate this feedback. As I said at the start, knew that this, bill as sort of put out is one pathway to codify in statute, and that might not be the right pathway. So I think this really is helpful. I guess, again, trying to synthesize what I'm hearing is data. And so maybe if an employer has an on-site medical provider or calls an ambulance, that, triggering a report to the workers' comp division, that I think maybe narrows it to really what we're trying to get here. So that's kind of what I synthesized. And so I'm wondering if maybe just pulse check, any immediate feelings on sort of quite significantly narrowing it to that sort of scope to get the data that we all are looking for, and to create a bit of a paper trail of an incident when it's on an on-site provider.
It's possible, you know, I don't see a lot of hands raised, Katie. You know, I wanted to just ask a question that we had asked earlier. You know, we're being brought this bill kind of late, you know, and it seems like there's a lot of need for data, and there's a lot of need to evaluate how it interacts with rules and such. And I'm just curious why it wasn't brought earlier so that we had more time to look at it.
Totally. And thank you for that question. I will echo all of what Joe said, just in terms of some timelines. And I think, as you all know, I'm also new to this role. So kind of working with what I was, what was in place when I took over. So doing the best I can. And like my, you know, sort of statement to you all is going forward, my intention would be for this not to be this late.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I know we're all trying to work as quickly as we can and get our heads around the issue. You know, some of the examples that were given seem so foreign to me, you know, for knowing good people that are employers that try to do the right thing. So it's hard for me to hear those stories, and also hard for me to know, you know, like the scope of it, because it sounds foreign to me. So so I hope you appreciate that. We are at the hour. We're at the time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I see Lynn with her hand raised.
Thank you, Patrick. Can I go back to 418 for a moment? I see it's up for a possible work session on Tuesday. Can the chair be informed that we're working diligently on it, but we aren't there yet?
That sounds like a good question. That sounds like a technical question. Is that the sort of thing where we write a letter,
No,
Kara?
we don't need to send a letter, Chair Priest. Well, Teresa will let the senator know, and I'm sure Joe will also.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Lynn. That was a good comment. Is there any other business to be brought before this group today?
I don't think so, other than just to note, members, because of the deadlines in the legislature, the 17th is your next meeting. That's also the deadline for committees to schedule work sessions on bills. So we might, given the long list of bills you have, we might need a little bit more time than a 2-hour meeting. Perhaps starting at 9 instead of 10. I'll talk to the co-chairs next week about agenda, but just wanted to give you a heads up about that. If anyone has issues with their schedule, could you let me know about those? You just send me an email. You don't need to let me know right this second, but we're trying to squeeze a lot of work into a short amount of time.
Yep. And we do have a carryover, and we will have everyone who wanted to speak on 418 have the ability to speak on it. So thank you for taking that note down as well. All right, if there is nothing else to be brought forward, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And I think I heard 2 people. Did somebody, the second
I'll
person
second.
You'll second? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Is there any opposed? Right, no. All right, well, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for your participation today. And I think it was respectful and professional. So thank you very much to everyone.